Okay, well, for the sake of time, because I know we have a lot of information to go over today, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this week's Zoom call, webinar, whatever we want to call it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Corinne Madison, and I'm with the United Dairy Families of California. Today, we are joined with the California Milk Advisory Board. We have Dayna Ghirardelli, who is the new Director of Producer Relations, for the CMAB, as well as Bob Carroll, who is the Vice President of Business Development. We are also joined by Robert Spiegel, who is a policy advocate at the California Farm Bureau Federation. I'm proud to say that Robert and I are former colleagues. He was my counterpart when I was at Farm Bureau, so I'm excited to have him on today and to see a familiar face. Normally, I would give a little bit more in-depth bio on each of our speakers, but because we do have 3 today, and for the sake of time, I'm just keeping it really short. Bob, Dayna, Robert, if you would like to share more of your background with the group today, feel free to go for it. And then before we get started, just a couple housekeeping things. If you have any questions or comments that you want to share with the good of the cause, feel free to use the Q&A feature or the chat feature. Both of those buttons you can find on the bottom of your screen. If you also want to speak into the webinar, you should have the option to raise your hand. If you click that button, it will give me a notification that will allow you to use your microphone, and you can unmute yourself and we can talk that way. So feel free to use one of those 3 methods, or any combination of those 3, I guess. And then just a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will be uploading it to our website following the meeting. So with that, I will let Dayna and Bob take it away.
Okay, thank you, Corinne. Just want to thank everybody for chiming in today. This is kind of a nice opportunity in the event, or at this time for me, kind of starting in this new position and haven't been able to get out and meet everybody. I just appreciate the time to kind of introduce myself and let everybody kind of know, seeing the name and what's going on. Now we can kind of put the face to the name. But just a quick background for me, I grew up in Petaluma on a dairy here, and went to school at Chico State a long time ago. And when I got out of school, worked for UC Extension as a dairy program rep, and then ended up, as I was raising my young family, I did some consulting for the local industry, doing organic paperwork and environmental regulatory paperwork and whatnot. And then prior to coming to CMAB, I have been with Clover Sonoma for the last 11.5 years as the producer relations manager. So working all aspects of producer relations with Clover, and loved that job. And people are probably wondering why I chose to come to CMAB. Well, I wasn't looking, and then with Chris leaving, I knew it's certainly huge shoes to fill that I don't plan on trying to fill. But I looked at it as a bigger opportunity to work with the dairy industry in the state on just kind of a broader scale, and to work with this great industry that's my passion, quite honestly. So kind of coming in a different realm, it's kind of a hard adjustment to go from really kind of being a part of the industry on a smaller scale in the Sonoma Marin areas, but working on all types of topics, from management to milk pricing to supply management to logistics around milk pickups, to strictly just looking at the scope that CMAB is kind of stuck to, which is research and promotions and education. And that really is quite the box that I've been reading up on. And I know that we wish we could do a heck of a lot more, but based on what I've learned so far, CMAB is pretty mighty in its small group that it does have, and working within that box. They're pretty mighty, and I think they're strategizing very well. But being a dairy farmer and being one of you, I am very keen on some of the frustrations that the industry has with feeling that there needs to be more, and I plan on being a part of hoping to make that change. And part of that change is also communicating and getting the information out so that you guys know how your dollars are being spent. How is the California Milk Advisory Board performing on your behalf? So still learning that, but as part of that, would really ask that all of you take the time to reach out to me through, I think Corinne's going to give my contact information so that I have ways to reach out to you. I've been sending out emails, giving updates, especially as of late during the COVID pandemic and all the different pivoting and changes that CMAB has been doing to keep up with the new consumer trends. Obviously, tremendous changes along those lines. So we've had to pivot quickly and just readjust. And Bob's going to talk about how, we're looking at, we've done a triage. We're continuing to look to see how things are changing, and we're trying to reimagine what the new normal is going to be and where are we headed. I've sent out, I have some emails. I have been pushing out information on the California Dairy Farmer Facebook page, and hoping that if you're not a member or on that group yet, if you're on Facebook, to join that, because I'm trying to utilize that also as a forum and a platform to be able to push out information and just kind of use it as our own hub, a kind of a comfort zone of a hub where we can all work together and integrate, and I can push information out and you can, participate. So hoping that I can just kind of increase the outreach and the communication for CMAB. So I asked Bob, and we had Bob kind of join in today because he's really the guy that's the force behind the team, that's really the boots on the ground. I know that with advertising and with all the different pieces, the parts that you're not seeing are actually probably just the most critical parts. And I'm wanting Bob to kind of go through all the different programs that we've been going through. I know some people have been frustrated, feeling like we're not seeing the outreach on the television channels or whatnot. But as I said, the team has shifted to focus on the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to getting that real California milk seal out in a digital way, in a social media way. They've done a lot with posting stuff about recipes and chiming in and honing in on the family being at home more, the family cooking and baking, and really trying to garner promotions in that way. They've been doing pre-taped and live television interviews with different registered dietitians and chefs. We partnered with the the Dairy Council of California to push out virtual farm tours. So we're working with the mobile dairy classroom, and we're actually taking some of your local or your fellow dairy producers who do a lot of social influencing are actually hosting live farm tours as part of that field trip. And over the course of only 6 days, there's been over 2,500 participants. So that's been really a great outreach tool. And then we're also been working with Milk Pep and pushing out the From All of Us messaging that I'm sure you guys have seen and hopefully on TV. So kind of trying to work all those angles. But again, those are the more visual things that everybody gets to see. And I'm really excited to have Bob talk about all the things where it's boots on the ground and things are happening, so that you guys can kind of understand all the things that you're not seeing. So Bob.
Thanks, Dayna, and thank you very much, Corinne, for inviting us here this afternoon. I lead the business development team, as Dayna and Corinne mentioned, really, which consists of food service, retail, and international, and also lead a lot of our strategy and planning efforts. So, my background, I've been here for 5 years working for CMAB. Prior to that, I spent 10 years at Blue Diamond, the almond growers cooperative in Sacramento. And prior to that, 6 years at Kraft and then 13 years as an infantry officer in the Army. So about 20 years of experience in the food business, and primarily in marketing and sales, and then in general management. I led the international division when I was at Blue Diamond. And I'm grateful to be able to be here and explain a little bit about our strategy and what we're doing right now to help. About 2 days into the lockdown situation, we woke up as a team and said, hey, this is a different environment. This is going to have far-ranging impacts. And right now our dairy farmers are facing a crisis. So we need to look differently. Some of our previous strategies, we didn't write them off, but we said, listen, we have to understand not only what's going on right now, but what impacts are likely to carry on past COVID, and how do we need to think differently and act differently to make sure that dairy, in a lot of cases, remains a central part of the behavior that's started right now. So I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about, this is the very briefest summary that I can possibly put together kind of on one page of, a situation analysis and then our planning imperatives. And then I'll talk a little bit about the 6 strategies and some tactics that I'm focused on and our team is focused on. So, we as I mentioned, when we look at the situation right away, certainly the most impactful change was the dramatic decline in dairy prices. A lot of that was market-based. Everyone, I think, at this point understands this imbalance between retail and food service that was created overnight. Retail channel grew dramatically and the food service and restaurant industry dropped dramatically. Kids at home instead of at school. People not in offices, they're also at home. We had, previously about 50% of total US food was consumed in the home and 50% out of home. And that includes restaurants, offices, schools, institutions. And that changed overnight to about 80% in home. And so we saw this complete supply chain imbalance that just turned everything on its head. On top of that, from the market perspective, fear, uncertainty, and doubt are certainly playing into the overall market situation, whether it be the stock market or commodities market, specifically the dairy market. We have shelter in place that has all those impacts that I've mentioned and many more. Unprecedented lifestyle changes. And in a lot of cases, these are good lifestyle changes. These are families coming back and consuming meals together in the home and eating breakfast together, and cereal and milk coming back to the forefront again. Things that, what's old in many cases is new again. And there are good things that silver linings, but we've never stopped focusing on how do we make sure as we look forward that those behaviors that include dairy continue and enhance, and how do we make sure we celebrate those and encourage those to continue. Every outcome's on the table. When we looked at, we pulled together a bunch of experts in about a week's time to do this rapid planning scenario. We looked at potential economic implications, all the way from kind of the macro level down to the micro level. And what we finally saw, what we really clearly saw, I should say, is that every outcome's on the table. There's wide disagreement. Is it going to be a quick bounce back, or are we approaching something to the level of the Great Depression? And the answer is, likely to be somewhere in the middle. But all these potential scenarios are on the table. Defining what recovery looks like is difficult. We don't know how soon people will go back to restaurants, even once the restaurants open, for instance. Financial impacts on the farm, your profitability, from the perspective of just Americans, there are so many people out of jobs, unprecedented in our lifetimes. And how is that going to impact food purchases, dairy purchases in particular, as we look forward? The government intervention, is a lot of the government power that they've garnered going to remain? Or on the positive side, is some of the relaxation of regulatory requirements possibly going to remain? And I think that this was a great watershed moment to see a lot of the regulations that were lifted, for instance, on food service packages being able to be sold in retail. Things like that are very, very impactful. We went from a real limited amount of information to an excess amount of information. Everyone's talking about it. Will there be a second wave in the fall? And how do we make sure that we're ready for it? And how long will consumer patience last with the shelter in place? I think we're seeing that start to fray, or significantly fraying. So as we look at the planning imperatives, number one is our farmers first. We have to make sure that everything we do today is squarely focused on how do we impact in the most dramatic way, as quickly as we can, the shift of business, and make sure that there's milk available for consumers to buy, and ultimately, how do we make sure that every lever that we can pull on the demand side of the equation, we are pulling to help bring dollars back to the farm and improve that check. Flexibility is essential. Talked about the range of outcomes. It's dramatic. And so we can't be locked into a media plan for 12 months that in an environment like this where things are changing rapidly and we have to be able to shift rapidly. There's unprecedented opportunity. We talked about the really good things that are happening with families eating together again and consuming more dairy in the home. We want that to continue. We want to increase that. And the channel and packaging misalignment. I'll get into some of this with the tactics, but dramatic misalignment and problems with people shifting from food service to so much more retail consumption. And then core markets and core products are, and I'll talk about really what that is, but it's how do we make sure we focus the marketing efforts and our business development team time and budgets against the absolute core where we can make the biggest difference. So for some reason, this isn't changing to the next slide. One second. All right, hold on. Okay, so the 6 key strategies that we identified focus on, kind of bucketed into what do we need to do now? What's most important to do now on the triage side? And then also, secondly, reimagining the future. First is focus on the core. And when I talk about focusing on the core, that's core products in core markets. So milk, number 1, fluid milk first, cheese and butter, and then core markets, California, a third of total dairy production that's, comes from California is consumed in California. And, it's obviously our core, the place we need to focus. The local message is meaningful and important more than ever to consumers right now. And so what are some of the things we're doing there? We saw right away, and I know it's frustrated every one of you, and it should, that retailers had limit signs up on their store, their dairy case doors. And we absolutely, we're in contact with retailers right away. We've been in contact with processors, trying to understand, is it truly a processor capacity issue or is it a retailer issue? And I can tell you it's shifted over time. But, we had our team in the stores right away, and we soon realized that the problem is too big and too vast for, the smaller CMAB team to make a difference. And so we brought in a merchandising force to bring dozens in to get into the top 300 stores in California to actually stock milk in the shelves, to talk to every single manager. Because we'd already talked to the headquarters and realized that in most cases, the retailer policy, whether it's Save Mart, Safeway, Raley's, or Ralph's down in Southern California, they were policy-wise saying the limit signs are off, but store managers were keeping them up because they either didn't have the labor to restock it or honestly just didn't take them down yet. So we hired a merchandising team to get into the stores, 300 stores. They've already taken down 101 of those signs, about 40, out of those stores. We've been to about half the stores so far, about 40 retailers. The manager would not let them take down the sign. And in every case, we're recording the store, we're recording the location, we're getting back to corporate, and we're getting back to the processor, the fluid milk processor who supplies that retailer, to make sure that they understand that, hey, you may be fine in total with your supply situation, but this store is still having a problem. And we're seeing that start to make a difference. In a lot of cases, the milk was stocked, and we move on to cheese and butter and make sure that it's the same in those cases. We're creating new commerce connections. This is this is really, really a big area for us because of that imbalance that I talked about between retail and food service. So we're working with Cisco right now, for instance, largest food service distributor in the country. We're talking today, actually the meeting is going on with my team right now, with the vice president of the Western region for Cisco. They have an initiative to help their customers, all the restaurants from small and local to their larger customers, become grocers or become pop-up grocery stores. And we are working with them to make sure that milk and dairy is absolutely central to that. And the two big areas that will benefit: fluid milk, because they can sell gallons in the restaurants, and then secondly, butter. And the size is a little larger than consumers are used to. Food service size would probably be a 1 pound, 1 pound of butter instead of the print butter, but it's still gonna, I think, engage with consumers and be a new point of connection. We've worked with food trucks. There's a network of food trucks in the Bay Area that we're connected with, and we connected them with a dairy distributor to be able to, and it'll start next week, to go to locations. We'll advertise where the locations are in a geo-targeted way around that area to say, hey, this food truck is going to be selling a core basket of goods that include dairy. So obviously there'll be milk and cheese and butter, and they'll also carry things like bread, eggs, and some other staples, potentially bacon or things that they can sell kind of in a drive-through fashion without a whole lot of people contact. We're bringing scale to specialty. So, it's difficult, especially in an environment like this, to we want to support the farmstead operations. We have to support them, but it's difficult. They all have individual challenges and customer situations, and we need to focus on the core and the big volume opportunities, but we cannot forget those farmstead guys and the specialty ones. So we're bringing them together. We're doing, starting right now, a California cheese box that's being called California Cheesemakers Select, and consumers will be able to buy online through a fulfillment center, California cheeses together. And we're working on a celebrity chef to be able to really volunteer time to promote that. We're engaging with consumers where they are right now. And what we mean by that is in the home, with their families, with their kids. And so this was an idea that came up on another chat group that I'm in with some dairy farmers, to say, hey, we could do a contest that includes dairy. The specific idea was around smoothies, but we've kind of broadened it to breakfast, to say, let's make sure that we're highlighting and celebrating the consumer changes that are happening right now. And we want them to carry on. So we're doing a contest, a video contest that'll hopefully go viral on social media, that'll shows consumers using real California milk products with the real California milk seal, whether it be smoothies or other breakfast type things, working with the family, working with their kids, and really inspiring others with ideas for breakfast and also ideas for connecting with the family. We took our June Dairy Month promotion and shifted it to a support local promotion. And that's going to be all over retailers in California. We're working with California Grown, which is really saying, hey, it's not just dairy that's in this boat. Let's leverage each other. Let's lean on each other and help each other. So other agricultural commodities through California Grown are going to be part of this support local initiative. Informing farmers. I mean, things like this. Dayna is clearly the primary lead here, but we want to make sure that you understand what we're doing. We want to listen, and we want you to know that we're working hard and strategically in this current situation. Reimagining food service. This is the one that there are, as far as the future goes, a lot of unknowns. But for what we know today, we know that restaurants are becoming grocers, and so we're focused there. We're contacting chains from big to small, and we're reaching the small guys through the distributors where we can get a lot of them at the same time to help make sure dairy is central to that and that we're promoting dairy. We're doing videos of best practices to help restaurants who are starting delivery maybe for the first time, or starting takeout, they didn't already have this in place before, we're sharing best practices through a video series with them. As restaurants start to open, a lot of them are going to be required to have paper menus and not the old, same menus that get passed along from table to table. And we're going to be working to put a real California milk coupon on there to promote California and to get cross purchases going back and forth between restaurants and back to retail. We have virtual tastings. We can't get out today physically to all the buyers that we normally do, and that's a lot of what my team does. Is we connect our processors and our dairy products with sales opportunities. So we're doing kind of similar to this with Zoom. We've tested it with some of the cheese companies where they mail their cheeses out to the buyers. We set up a Zoom call and a forum for them to present their products virtually, since we can't do it in person. And we've been working kind of on a tactical level with pizzerias. Pizzerias are largely doing better than others, but not all of them are doing great. And we said, hey, how can we connect our cheese makers, the pizzerias, the food service distributors to provide pizzas for our first responders? So that's been an initiative that we've been focused on as well. And then finally, building the hub. Innovation and long-term growth, sustainable growth, is really more important than ever. The institutions, the companies, the organizations that completely stop thinking about the long term during a crisis do never fare as well as the ones who are thinking further out. And so we've been working, I think most of you are familiar with Cal Poly's, they used to call it the Leprino Innovation Center or the Dairy Innovation Center. We're really working now to broaden that and say, let's bring Cal Poly, Fresno State, and Davis together. Let's get our processors together. Let's get our dairy farmers together to think about bigger picture innovation. So how do we, for instance, help increase the amount of long life fluid milk that we have in the state? If there ever was a time that we look at Fairlife, it's a good example, but it's not California milk. And we want to make sure our processors are fully engaged in the growth areas, especially the ones that are more meaningful than ever right now. And so we're continuing to work on innovation there. It's going to include packaging innovation, thinking about delivery even. When we think about processes, and one of the long-term goals in the innovation space, one of the questions that we're trying to answer right now is, how do we bring more profitability back to the dairy farmer, to the farm itself? And part of the way to do that, an idea to do that, is to start to vertically integrate. And we know not everyone can be a farmstead operation, but how can we create systems and delivery? Think like the new milkman, delivery systems that allow maybe groups of dairy farmers to kind of start to vertically integrate more and bring more of that profit back on the farm. And these are long-term initiatives that aren't going to help your milk check today, but if we're not thinking about them today, and if we're not working on them now, the next time one of these crises hit, we're not going to be prepared. And we want resiliency. Small, local is crucial to the fabric of our food supply and our nation. It's crucial to you as dairy farmers. It's crucial to all of ag, really. But we want to try to think longer term. How do we build resiliency into our system and more profitability back to the farm? And I'm going to stop there. It's an awful lot, but it's just a flavor of what we're working on right now during this COVID situation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that all with us, Bob. It sounds like there's a lot of exciting things coming down the pipeline, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing them being rolled out more and more. And I appreciate your comments on building resiliency, although I hope that we don't have another global pandemic of this magnitude again in the future, but I understand what you're saying. With that, Dayna, do you have anything else to share? And then also we can open it up for comments and questions from the participants. So if you have anything to ask, feel free to go ahead and ask it now.
I just wanted to add that on May 28th, we're working on doing this type of format through CMAB for dairy farmers of California to log in and listen to John Talbot kind of pushed out a lot of what Bob's already talked about, but just looking at the overall CMAB initiatives, obviously we didn't have district meetings. Don't know when the next one we'll be able to have. So it'll be a great way to kind of circle back from a CMAB point of view. So everybody just kind of be watching for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Dayna. Does anybody have any questions for either Bob or Dayna? Oh, I do see somebody has raised their hand. All right, Brian, I think you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. All right. Hey, good job, Bob, on that. One of the things we are obviously hearing a lot about is pivoting based on what's happening there today. And I'm a runner, although I haven't been running as much as I want to, but I've been hearing through the news that because of the gyms being closed and all that kind of stuff, that more people are running. And they were even showing a story the other night on Fleet Feet doing virtual fittings. And one of the things, because I'm so passionate about the dairy industry, that I'm always talking about is that chocolate milk is the #1 recovery drink. And so I would say if they're, talk about pivoting, there's a great opportunity to get that out there now. And because more people are out there running and we've got the best recovery drink, and maybe there's even opportunities to do coupons with Fleet Feet or whatever. But just in general, I just could not keep my mouth shut on that.
That's a fantastic comment, Brian, and a great idea. And you're right. I agree with you 100%. This is an excellent time to do that. And I think, we'll take that back. I'm not the social media marketing person, but Dayna and I will take that back to them because it is a great idea.
And Dayna, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Brian.
Yes, I can hear you.
That's from a fellow Chico State grad too.
Oh, fine. I thought I was going to be overrun by Cal Poly people, so I appreciate that very
All
much.
right.
Thanks, Brian. Any more questions or comments for CMAB? All right, well, we can also, if something comes up, we can ask questions at the end of the call. But for now, we are going to hand it over to Robert Spiegel, who is going to give a quick recap of our wonderful friends, the animal activists, and how they are using COVID-19 to their advantage to try to push their agendas, and how you guys can be on the lookout for some of their efforts and therefore protect yourselves. So with that, take it away, Robert.
Thank you, Corinne. Like I've been introduced, Robert Spiegel. I'm with California Farm Bureau Federation. I've been with the organization now, I think, going on 3 years. I come from a background of working for various congressional officials and state legislators here in California. All in all, together, about a 15-year career. And why my brother went to Chico State, I'm unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on your position, a graduate of UC Davis. So don't hold that against me for all of the San Luis Obispo graduates. But yeah, it's been an interesting time with Farm Bureau as we are responding to the crisis here in Sacramento or California, as well as nationally as it relates to our dairy families. And as a statewide organization, we represent some 36,000 family farmers and associated members. So this is not only dairies and beef, but this is also poultry. This is also the produce and nut commodities and various associated issues to that. So COVID-19, I think, as we see it from our organization, as the legislature came back on Monday to further discuss the accurate response. I think foundationally COVID-19 will foundationally change how we in the United States and we in California interact with everybody. In addition to what that means for our producers and what that means for agriculture and everybody on that supply chain. So today I've been asked to provide some updates and some context to an issue that I've had to deal with since literally, I think, my first month on the job with Farm Bureau, and it's dealing with the animal activist community. And for those of you who have worked with my organization or part of my organization, I inherited that portfolio from Noelle Kremers, who did such a phenomenal job for us over her years with the organization. And primarily today, I'll see if I can share my screen here. We're going to talk about one group in particular, and the reason being is, so I'm going to my entire slideshow from beginning. And I'm not going to go through all of this because some of it's just, you know, I won't say worthless information, but it's just not necessary for our discussion today. And for those of you who have joined the call from my organization, apologies, I don't have anything new per se in terms of the PowerPoint to share with you, but I will be happy to share some broader updates as it relates to kind of the national environment. But primarily for us and for my organization, the group that we've primarily been focusing on is Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE, here in California. Having worked for a state senator years ago, a decade ago now, who was very interested in being accessible to his constituents, I've kind of taken that on as part of how I do my job. And my contact information is here for anyone who would like to contact me, both email and cell phone, as well as my office number. I'm also very happy to speak to you offline or at any time that you wish. I'm not an attorney. I'm also not a veterinary scientist or anything along those lines. I've been a policy consultant and a lobbyist for a good part of my career. So this is just a simple legal disclaimer that I'm not here to provide any advice on legal authority, for I am not one, since Carroll is not joining me today, obviously being an attorney for us, but we are not in a position to provide any type of legal advice to particular issues. But as I mentioned, you know, we're talking about, I'd like to just discuss one group primarily, and that's Direct Action Everywhere. And we do have a very broad set of actors as it relates to animal activism in the United States as well as internationally. And through our contacts and through our association with the Animal Ag Alliance, which is an organization out of Washington, D.C., that does a phenomenal job of education materials and kind of tracking the animal activist market or the networks as who belongs to who. This is a phenomenal chart that they've been able to put together that kind of shows the interactions of the various organizations. You know, through and through, most of these organizations, and some of these aren't necessarily your true animal rights extremist groups, but they do have often very extensive, social media type presence, Facebook, Meetup, Instagram, etc. And they utilize highly expensive and sophisticated video equipment when they do show up to a farm and they do show up to a particular facility, and it's all intended to create kind of this Hollywood production drama associated to what it is they're doing. As I mentioned, DXE, what's really phenomenal about, you know, this particular group, and maybe I'm using a poor word choice, but they're able to broadcast their activities fairly openly through social media. It's a great mechanism for them to communicate with their followers, for them to communicate with other individuals. DXE is not only a California group, but they're also known internationally. So through their social media presence, you're able to find pretty much everything that you need to know about what activities they are doing, how they're planning, or what their structure may be, or what they intend to do at some future date and time. And it also kind of gives indications as to what it is they're doing, or what may be a next step in their particular program. Frontline surveillance being one, which we're starting to see even now post-COVID or during COVID, that they're continuing to conduct their investigative roles, or what they feel is their investigative role here in California, in the U.S., of showing up and essentially trespassing on a particular field or on a particular establishment to get information or video or still photos of a particular operation and what they feel may be a particular violation of any number of California laws related to animal cruelty or animal abuse, etc. And then, because so many of the activists associated with this group have been arrested, they've actually had to start rolling out some type of a mental health type seminar to ensure that these individuals are able to cope with being locked up in a particular facility. And to our friends and colleagues in law enforcement, that have worked with Farm Bureau exclusively over these last 3 years and kind of dealing with this new stage of activism. It has been a no-nonsense strategy from our law enforcement, and that doesn't, and that's not just one jurisdiction. That's just not Sonoma County Sheriff Essick or Under Sheriff Noggle. It's you know, San Joaquin County Sheriff Withrow, or San Diego County Sheriff Gore, or even a good colleague of ours in Stanislaus County with Sheriff Dirksey. Like, these individuals do not form the fabric of the communities in which our dairy families and our organization represents. These are largely individuals from outside outside the geographical boundaries of an area, and they're in to cause trouble. They're in to harass. They're in to make hay, no pun intended, to things that may not be necessarily a violation, but maybe maybe their own perception relative to the existing regulations or laws that we have in California, especially related to, like, let's say, not for dairy specifically, but poultry, Proposition 12. They do have various branches or local groups outside of just Berkeley, California, and they have some in San Diego, which has been very problematic for some of our producers in San Diego County. In addition to that, this is just a snapshot of some of their activities, and for a long time it wasn't necessarily directed at anything towards production agriculture. It was those supply chain components associated to what it is we do, or where our products are essentially sold. So unfortunately for Whole Foods, who have been I would say probably the primary victim of some of their protests, they've had, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 dozen now attempts or sit-in protests at various Whole Food markets across California, simply related to Jeff Bezos and Amazon's, I guess, financial ownership in that particular industry or in that particular business, and have gone to the length so much of issuing court-ordered restraining orders against individuals associated to that organization. Now, I don't think I need to quite go into that. I think there's generally some broad understanding of who these individuals are. I don't need to go into really the legal rationale unless someone truly wants to. But as we were transitioning into this legislative year prior to COVID, we were interested in kind of seeing what potential there could be for various pieces of legislation. And this Rose's Law was one that was we were primarily thinking would become a broader legislative platform for various things here in California, essentially supporting a right to rescue, or, and if you're some of our members, a right to theft of a particular animal. While we haven't had any dairy cows per se stolen or taken from a ranch, it's primarily the poultry animals in particular that have been taken from a facility, put into a car, and jetted off to some animal sanctuary here away from their captive, from their captives, so to speak. And Rose's Law was truly about setting up some sort of program or legislative Bill of Rights for animals, essentially elevating the rights of animals to that of equal right of human under California law, whether it was criminal and or civil. And this kind of goes through what we were anticipating it to be. As we've gone through this year, we have not seen any particular legislation. I'm happy to talk about some of the other components related to some of the other measures that we saw, which are no longer moving forward. But I think for really this discussion, it's really wanting to try to provide not only Farm Bureau members, but the broader industry with some practical steps of what we can do to insulate ourselves from being a target or being in some ways a victim of these groups. And even with COVID, while we have seen fewer activities, fewer incursions, fewer thefts, the indicators are still there to say that these folks are still operating, and they are continuing to do it. And even just a couple weeks ago, this morning, I just received an email from one of our members in Southern California indicating that he had individuals out hopping his fences and taking video of his operation, and providing that information to law enforcement. But I mean, some of it I think is simple, and obviously we are in, very difficult financial and economic times for many of our operations, especially our dairy operations in California. And I don't want to say these are common sense, but these are some of the things that we have always had to deal with in ag. And animal activism or rural crime is not something that's particularly new to agriculture or living in a rural community. For example, locking gates, buildings, equipment, even during working hours. During the last recession here in California, we had individuals going out and stealing piping and stealing pumps and different things from our farms. And it's just something that, we may by living in a rural area take for granted of some of the safety and security that we may have had. But these individuals are particularly looking for weaknesses in our operations to take advantage of. One of the big things that we've been asking our membership to do is really establishing a check-in procedure for all visitors, having an employee walk and be next to a visitor at all times on a particular farm or a particular dairy. And even with this, just 2 weeks ago, an activist that was involved in an issue in Stanislaus County a couple years ago, who faced no charges from the DA down in that particular county, posed as a technician associated to a CO2 stunner company to gain access to a pork processing plant here in California. And upon her leaving the facility, they discovered an undercover camera that was hidden inside of a piece of equipment that she was supposedly, I'll do air quotes, servicing. And those are all great concerns. And all of these concerns, I think, take a very different context and different view given COVID and given the seriousness of what it is our industry provides in terms of national security, in terms of providing food security for not only California, but for the entire nation. And I think there's some arguments with how the activists are doing their work and violating, let's say here in California, some of the very strict shelter in place or stay at home orders as it relates to their activities. And we are doing everything we can in our industry to protect our critical employees associated to our critical industries so that we are able to continue the operations that we have. But if we have folks who are willingly violating the order, they may be asymptomatic, they may be carrying a vector for COVID, and we don't know if that interaction between an employee and an individual will lead to a greater risk and employee risk for our individuals or for the members themselves. So again, here are some other practical steps. Maintaining basic security, like I said, here in California, posting no trespassing signs at least per mile, or 3 per mile at various entrances. Biosecurity areas and signage for those, I think, are very good as well. But keep in mind, from an industry perspective or a private landowner perspective, what I like to tell our membership is what we are trying to do is when an individual who shows up on a particular property or a particular location and they are not wanted, they are not intending to be there for a particular reason, that you are essentially putting mechanisms in place to build the case that they are in violation of some component of California law, whether it is trespassing, whether it is breaking and entering, whether it is theft of an animal. And those are all things to kind of take into consideration with that as well. Another big component of this is proactively conducting and engaging with local law enforcement. I know for many of at least our county farm bureau members, they have developed long-standing respect and conversations and protocols with local law enforcement. For those who have rural crime divisions, it's absolutely imperative that both from my county farm bureau perspective, but from a membership perspective, as you get to know those deputies, you get to have those interactions. And I think from there, I'll just maybe quickly transition to what we're seeing nationally. And as I said, we've had various issues associated to activists here in California, but also, we've seen issues and we've heard of issues in other states, including activist groups, not, like I said, not necessarily affiliated with DXE, but through, I think I'm going to end up going to a different link here. Sorry about that. But to posing as census workers and trying to gain access to particular facilities to essentially be there to take the 2020 census, which is inaccurate and not is absolutely not valid. So I think with that, I've gone probably 10, maybe 15 minutes for questions. And I don't like to talk too much because I know when I start going on this, a lot of folks will have questions about their particular interactions with a various organization or perhaps the activist community. And I'd just like to open it up now to questions, or if there's anything else that I can touch on that would be helpful for anyone listening in via Zoom or for Corinne or anybody, I'd be more than happy to answer those now.
Awesome, thanks, Robert. Well, I just conducted a poll of the people attending, and there is an individual on the call who has had a problem with animal activists, I presume on their property or at their operation. So I'd be interested to hear from them if they wanted to share their story, or again, if anybody has any questions for you. I guess not. I guess people are shy today.
Well, I mean, maybe I can just continue on with maybe a real quick kind of update as to what we may be seeing here in California, or what COVID has, I guess, pushed like maybe DXC particularly into doing here to try and raise some to raise their level of I guess activism here in the state. And what I will share real quickly is, oops, let me see, there we go. So at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, DXE actually went to the Sacramento, or to the Capitol here in Sacramento, and handed over a document and series of policy recommendations. And I believe everyone should have this now on their screen. And one of the, I think, largest narratives that is being shared by primarily only the most extreme arm of the activist community per se, is that COVID-19 is part of the coronavirus families, as a pathogen, is primarily the result of production agriculture, and the conditions in which the animals live and are fed and are housed here and across the globe, excuse me. And fundamentally, I mean, we can have a discussion about whether COVID-19, and I'll say this kind of jokingly, was either developed in some sort of biosecurity laboratory, or whether it came from a wet market, which there are discussions here in California about banning wet markets and what that means for broader industries. But the policy recommendations really, I think, brought some attention to how we see the next several years moving post-COVID, from some of the very fringe type groups here in California. And that could be essentially an acknowledgement of the link between animal ag and pandemics, which I think is, while there may be some truth to that, again, I'm not a scientist, but you know, to the extent that is alleged, I think is very broad and factually inaccurate. They also want to enshrine the right to rescue again, the transition to a 100% plant-based food system, ignoring the potential costs, ramifications to that, both for California's minority community, both for those who are underprivileged here in California and what that means for them. And ultimately ultimately, I think for the group, and at least for this document, it was like, okay, we've seen the roadmap now of what it truly is that some of these activists want. And I think kind of maybe my parting comments here could be something, you know, along the lines of, you know, these individuals, if for my organization and for many folks in my industry, if there was an actual ask, if there was something that we are doing as an industry, if there is something that we are doing as an organization to not protect the health and safety of these animals in a manner which really gets to the core of why we are in agriculture, I think we would be open to those discussions. But at the very core of some of these arguments, it's not some of these arguments, all of the arguments, especially from this one group, is that the act of animal agriculture in and of itself is inhumane. And the only rational response or the rational component of what it is we do should not exist. So they are arguing for the entire elimination of an entire industry. And that's a real tough position, I think, for anyone to go in and negotiate for, or have a conversation about. Again, if there was some factual, if there was some very specific things of what we can do, whether it was improving best management practices, whether it was, we've had discussions with antibiotics in livestock several years ago here in California, I think there would be a willingness to chat. But because the end game is essentially the elimination of our industry and our way of life, I think that's very difficult for my membership and my members to be able to stomach. I did see a question. Let me see if I can get there.
Yeah, so the question is,
Oh, sorry.
the farm program is used by every dairy in California, but we don't seem to have identified that with Real California. I presume Arlen means Real California Milk. He's asking why not. So I think that might be more of a question for Dayna and Bob, but obviously, Robert, if you want to take a stab at it, go ahead.
No, I'll definitely defer to Bob and Dayna on this one.
I can tell you when we talk to buyers, when we talk to retailers who have sustainability programs, the farm program actually absolutely is part of what we talk about. And I actually did a presentation in Mexico even about 2 years ago that really highlighted the whole program. And it's really a question of what's relevant to consumers and what's relevant to the industry. I think, to be quite honest, the vast majority of consumers have really no issue with how we treat the animals. Essentially, it's almost a question of, do we want to make it a consumer issue that's not an issue? But where it is an issue, and I can tell you that with retailers, it is. And that's where we really focus the efforts of the strength of that program, and I and my team do it.
And just to add to that, when I saw that question come in, actually not every dairy in California is following the farm program, but in lieu of the farms program, they might be under another third party certified type program. So I think to Bob's point, we utilize that for marketing and working with consumers, and because it's an extremely valuable point for our industry that every dairy, to whatever degree, be it the farms program or whatnot, is doing their part.
Thanks for the question, Arlen. Anybody else have any questions for either Robert, Bob, or Dayna? Looks a little quiet, but I know sometimes people are typing or trying to figure out how to use the Zoom features or whatever. On the topic of animal activists, though, I will share that I did hear that there was an animal activist who was posing as a veterinarian and was reaching out to other vets in the state, hoping to shadow them on livestock operations. So just another thing to be cautious of and aware of is if your vet, I mean, I'm sure all of you guys have your own vet or somebody on staff, but if somebody shows up with them that you've never seen before, I don't think it would do any harm just to ask a few questions and make sure that that person is vetted and, they don't have a sketchy background. Gino, I saw that you have a question or something.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you three for the presentation, and especially at CMAB. Robert, you do a good job too. But at CMAB, you guys doing what you're doing in this trying time. I know a lot of dairymen, have different ideas on everything, as we always do, but you guys are hanging in there and trying your best to help us out, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I feel like we have to make a comment about how Bob left the almond milkers and came over to the real dairy milkers.
I don't think I've ever presented that to a group of dairymen and not had a comment on it. So
Any more questions, folks?
It's almond juice, Corinne.
Oh, yes. Thank you for correcting me, Gino. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions or comments from folks. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again to Bob, Dayna, and Robert for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully we didn't keep you from traveling or driving anywhere. And thank you to everybody that called in or is attending the webinar. Again, we will be uploading the recording of this shortly this afternoon. So feel free to, if you have any questions or missed some information and want to go back and revisit it, you can find it on our website later. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or give me a call. There will be an email going out, I think it goes out tomorrow, that will have Robert and Dayna's contact information. So if you have any questions or want further information from them, you'll have their contact info. And with that, thanks again, everyone, and have a good day.